Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm going to get this party started here. Uh, got a lot to talk about this morning, so let me just dive right in. Uh, Good morning. I have some back issues going on this morning, so if suddenly I get up and scream in pain, uh, you will. I apologize for that. But I threw my back out. Actually, I threw my back out yesterday walking the dog, and I stepped on, I don't know, a beehive, a underground beehive or something, and these bees started buzzing my head, and I was just going all crazy, and it was just, it was insane, man. And I think I tweaked my back when I was doing that. So anyway, it had a good night's sleep, and it's still hurting, but get through this. Uh, okay, I want to talk about another type of landscape photo. We talked about this idea of what's called high dynamic range, or HDR. And the idea of shooting in HDR was to capture all the tone in a photograph. And so the way we did that is by setting up our camera to shoot 3 consecutive pictures at different exposures. And then we brought it into Lightroom and we processed it using a HDR processing technique. And that really makes a difference from shooting one photo and doing no processing to shooting an HDR photo and going through this technique. And had some examples of the difference between the before and after. What I want to talk about today is another type of photograph, and let me just jump to my share screen here. Good morning, everybody. I see everyone's here, so that's great. And okay, so what I want to talk about today in the lecture is how to shoot what's called a panoramic photo. And I'll explain to you what that is about. And then again, how to process that photo in Lightroom. You might find yourself doing this a lot because it's just an amazing way to capture a landscape. It is a combination of using Photoshop and Lightroom together, just like the HDR was. We're going to go into Photoshop, we're going to stitch this photo together, and then we're going to come back into Lightroom and process it. So what is a panorama? What is, I'm sure you've heard that term before. A panorama is simply, a wide shot of a landscape. And basically, it's a technique of shooting a landscape in pieces. So what we're doing, and I'm going to crudely demonstrate that, and hopefully, I've got my camera here, and I'm going to show you on my camera how you would do that, both handheld and on a tripod. Now, doing it on a tripod is really the preferred way to do it, but a lot of times we don't have a tripod with us. We can handhold and shoot a panorama. It is possible. In fact, it's very possible. I've done that many times. As long as your shutter speeds are fast enough where you're not going to blur the photo. And we talked a little bit about shutter speed, about how shutter speed should be at least 1 over the focal length. So if you're using 50 millimeters as your focal length, you really need a shutter speed 1/50th of a second or faster. If you're using a long telephoto lens, like a 200 millimeter lens or a 400 millimeter lens, you need a shutter speed that's 1 over 200 or 1 over 400 or faster. So that's a good general rule of thumb to follow. Your shutter speed should be 1 over your focal length. So the longer the lens is, the faster your shutter speed needs to be. And once you have that, though, once you've accomplished that, and that's not too difficult to get when you're outdoors in bright sun. You can get, incredibly fast shutter speeds, 1/1000, 1/2000, 1/4000. So the bright sun outside automatically gives you fast shutter speeds. When you get down into low light conditions, like when the sun starts going down, like sunset, which is a beautiful time to shoot landscapes, the only problem is that your shutter speeds get very slow. So that's when you need a tripod. Early in the morning, another beautiful time to shoot photos, but slow shutter speeds. So a tripod is really a good accessory to have in all of this, because it allows you to shoot these really nice landscape photos at the end of the day or early in the morning. But in the afternoon, should have no problems. And from say 9 o'clock in the morning till, I don't know, it's daylight or standard time now, so maybe 3 o'clock or 2:30 in the afternoon now, you should have no trouble. But once you get around that 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, man, it's slow. You need a tripod for that. Okay, so a panorama is what you're doing is you're taking your camera and you're turning it portrait, and you're looking at the scene. And let me just jump to a scene here. Let me jump to my I'm going to do this example here. This was a scene that as Carly and I were driving back from Mammoth, we looked off to the right and we saw this scene, and clouds were in the sky. It was just an amazing scene. And so we pulled off the road. I pulled out my tripod and I took a panorama, and I think this was about 6 or 7 shots. You first look at the scene, and what I like to do is just kind of take my hands and just kind of spread it out and say, okay, I'm going to shoot from here to here. And rather than turning your camera landscape and trying to capture the whole scene, which actually is possible, the only problem is that the scene is so small in your camera. And so what you want to do is you want to zoom in with your DSLR, with your T7i, zoom in as much as you can, turn your camera portrait, and look to the far left of where you want to start, and then look to the far right where you want to end, and then proceed to shoot slices of that panorama as you go across the scene. And it might take you 3 shots, it might take you 4 shots, it might take you 10 shots to get everything. It all depends on how much you're zoomed in. If you're zoomed in a lot with, say, a long telephoto lens, which is really the best way to shoot a panorama. I shot this with a 200 millimeter lens, fully zoomed in at 200. Remember, I was on the road, so this scene was really far away. If I took it in one shot, landscape, it would have been microscopic. So I zoomed in all the way, I turned my camera portrait, and I started taking slices of this shot from, actually there's a little bit more on this side and there's a little bit more on this side, but I cropped it a little bit. I then brought this into Lightroom when I got home, and then I processed it. So I want to tell you how to set up your camera to shoot something like this, and then we'll go through a very quick process in Lightroom. The first thing you want to do with your camera, and I'm going to grab my phone here and stop sharing this so you can see my phone. And if you're there, go ahead and click on my phone. I actually want to unpin this. Okay. I'm going to come around to my camera here so you can see this. Turn the camera on. And my microphone might start petering out on me because it's... okay, so hopefully you can see that camera there. I have my camera on a tripod, and I have this little doohickey on top of the ball head, which allows me to swing the camera left to right and keep a horizontal movement, because the ground many times is not level. And so even though you level out your tripod, when you spin it from left to right, it still spins at an angle. So you need one of these little things right here, this little disc right here. They're not that expensive, but it allows you to get a nice horizontal movement. Now this is if you're using a tripod. This is if you're really getting technical about how you're shooting it. But you can, again, hand hold this. So I just want to show you on a tripod. Okay, I'm going to go to the regular view here. And hopefully you can, I don't know, it's kind of hard to see that. I've got it pointed at my door. Let me turn off my info. Okay. So I don't know if you can see that, but it's kind of blowing out. That's what I hate about these phones. And so if I turn my camera here, you can see that I'm starting to, this is terrible the way this is happening. Let me get up and see if this can work a little bit better. Everything is backwards. Okay. So as I turn my camera, you can see as I'm going around the room here, from left to right. Okay, now what I'm going to ask you to do is kind of imagine this as a scene, a landscape scene. And what you're going to do is you're going to take a picture, but you're going to pay attention to what's on the right side of your frame. And in this case, this is my little fan. And you want to really make note of what's on the right side, because when you take your next shot and you spin the camera, you want to make sure that that is in the frame on the left side of the shot. Because when you bring this into Photoshop, you're going to stitch it together, and Photoshop has to see the same element that was on the right on the left so it can match it up. Okay, now if you look on the right side of the frame, you see my little bamboo plant up there. So when you spin the camera around to take your third shot, you need to have that in there so that Photoshop can see that similarity and match it up. So then the next shot is my little mixer that's sitting on that table there, and my little speaker. You see the speaker in the right side there. So when I take the next shot, I want to make sure that that speaker right there is in the next shot. And you will continue to do this as you spin the camera around and take subsequent shots. Okay. So I think you get the point here. So what you're going to do is you're going to first look at your scene, kind of put your hands out and say, I'm going to take from here to here. And as you're holding the camera, portrait, you're going to take the shot and then move it and take the next shot and move it, take the next shot, move it, take the next shot until you cover that whole scene. So here's some settings that you're going to do. Okay, number one, and I'll just use this camera up here. Number one, on your lens here, when you look at the autofocus and manual focus button, which is right there, I want you to flip that to manual focus. And the reason why you're going to use manual focus is because when you use autofocus and you press the shutter halfway down, it autofocuses the shot, the scene. But what it also does is it grabs a light meter reading. Okay, it measures the light and it adjusts the exposure based on that light. The problem with that is that as you move across the scene, if your light changes, your camera is always adjusting for that particular lighting condition, which means that you could have, each shot could have different lighting conditions as you go across, and you don't want that, because you don't want, if it's bright on this side of the mountain and it gradually gets darker on this side of the mountain, you don't want the camera to keep giving you even exposure across the scene. Does that make sense? It's kind of like you want that darkness as you go across, because that's the natural way light is hitting that scene. If you're on autofocus, the camera is going to automatically adjust to brighten up a scene to the right exposure. And it's going to be funny when you stitch it in Photoshop, because what Photoshop's going to do is stitch all the photos together fine, but this one's going to be bright, this one's going to be even brighter, this one's going to be even, back to normal brightness, and so you're going to get uneven light as you go across. Now imagine a sky, right? You want that sky to be this, have a nice gradation from light to dark, if that's the case. You don't want it to be light, dark, and light, dark. So anyway, turn on manual focus. Now, when you do that though, you're going to have to manual focus your shot. Once you manual focus the shot, then just take each shot as you go across with that same focus. Don't start manually focusing each shot. Manual focus, what I would do is manual focus the center shot, okay? Get good focus on that. And then spin it to the left and start shooting all the way across, okay? And make sure that you're overlapping each shot so that Photoshop will be able to see the similarity. So manual focus is one thing. The next thing is, on your camera, there's another button that's called image stabilizer. And if you are hand holding your shot, which you'll probably be doing, and unless you're on a tripod, if you're hand holding your shot, you want your image stabilizer on, because what that's going to do is steady your camera as you move across. If you're on a tripod, then you want to put your image stabilizer off, because it's rock steady on a tripod. You don't need any of the gyros inside the lens trying to balance your camera, because it's already stable. So tripod, image stabilizer off always. Handheld, image stabilizer on all the time. Okay, so those are the two first settings that you want. And the second thing is that you're going to be on aperture priority, the AV mode. And we talked about that last. That prioritizes your aperture, which means that your f-stop that you want to choose for this particular shot is going to be a deep depth of field f-stop, which is around f11 or f8, somewhere around there. You're going to be out in bright sunlight, so you want deep depth of field. You should have fast enough shutter speeds to do this. f11, f8, good apertures. f16, that's fine too. Your ISO, which is your image, your sensor sensitivity to light, keep that low. Keep that as low as your camera will go. So ISO 100 will be good. And as far as your focal length goes, okay, of your lens, you go from 18 to 55. Make sure that it's on 55. Okay, you don't want to shoot wide when you shoot these panoramas. Number one, if you shoot wide, you're going to get too much in that first shot. If you shoot wide, to capture the entire scene, it might only take you 2 shots. But the problem with shooting wide is that you get distortion. And when Photoshop tries to stitch those 2 photos together and both of them are distorted, then you get some really weird effects. So the more telephoto you are, the better for these type of shots. So 55, you can do it at 55. I've done it at 55 before, and it comes out fine. If you have a more telephoto lens, I would recommend using you know, even like what I did was I used a 200 millimeter lens. Those come out really nice because you can zoom in. It does take a lot more photos for you to capture that whole scene, but it just comes out really nice as far as the how big the image is. So if you want to get close to those mountains and you're far away, you need a telephoto lens to do that. But anyway, use 55. 55 will not distort. 55 millimeters is about what your eye sees. Okay, you know, when we look out on a scene, we usually see it, with the human eye usually sees it at around 50 millimeters in terms of the width. So that's why these lenses go up to 50 or 55, because that's kind of, now 18 is really wide. Our eyes don't see that wide. And so it's nice for group shots and, you know, inside buildings and rooms and things like that, but it's not really good for landscapes because it makes the image too small. So we'll go to 55. We'll hold our camera portrait. We'll be at manual focus, image stabilization on for hand holding. As far as the focus, you know, the one shot, you want to take one shot at a time. You don't want to be on high speed. So take your camera, if you shot HDRs before, take your camera back onto one shot. So every press of the shutter is only one shot. We're not going to do HDR panoramas. Now you could do that. It's possible where you take, you know, bang, 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 move, bang, 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 move, bang, 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 take 3 shots of each slice. And you would think, yeah, that would probably give you the best of all worlds because you're doing HDRs of each individual slice. And it does. It creates an even a more amazing shot, but your computer is probably not fast enough to process that amount of raw imagery. Most computers will crash unless you have like a big MacBook Pro or something, you know, or a Mac Pro. It's almost impossible for Lightroom to be able to handle that. But anyway, we're just going to do one shot, and you might end up with 5 or 6 shots total. Make sure that you're overlapping, okay? I want to really emphasize that because if you don't overlap your shots, if Photoshop cannot see the overlap, then when you bring it into Photoshop and you stitch it, Photoshop's going to get confused and not going to be able to do it. And you're going to have, you know, just it's going to look really funny the way Photoshop does it. So make sure that you overlap. In fact, what I would do is take several panoramas. Now, when you're taking a number of panoramas, let's say you see this beautiful scene out there, and so you go bang, 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 and you shoot your panorama, and you're at the last shot, okay? Then what I would do is the next shot, just point it at the ground and shoot the ground so that you know that's the last shot of that set, okay? And then go back up and shoot again. Because if you shoot 7 shots and then turn back and shoot 7 shots again, and then turn back and shoot 7 shots again, 3 sets, what's going to happen is when you look at your photos in Lightroom, it's going to get really confusing because you're going to see all of these, you know, mountains or whatever, and you're not going to know where the first one starts and where the second, you know, where the second one starts. So I usually, you know, they say, you know, cover your lens with your hands and shoot your hand and then do 7 again, shoot your hand, do 7 again. And that way that acts as a spacer in between those shots. So it's really difficult to kind of explain this online in this kind of format. Usually when I'm in class, I'm standing up and I'm, you know, demonstrating this and showing you the back of the camera and all of that, but does that seem pretty understandable so far?
Yeah.
Yeah. Get some
Yeah, that sounds good enough.
feedback here. Yeah. Okay. So the next thing that I'll do then is show you the result of those 7 photos that I shot. And let me share the screen now. This is the finished photo that I had uploaded to Google Photos after I processed it from Lightroom, and I exported it with our watermark on it. So let me go into Lightroom now and go to the library, and you can see now the 7 shots here, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, the 7 shots that make up this panorama. Now this one has already been processed. I already processed it, so disregard this photo right here. Really, these are the photos here. And if I go to the develop module and I show you the first photo, you can see that this is the far left side of that panorama. And then as we move across, okay, so what you want to look at here is the right side. So as you're shooting this, you have to kind of pay attention to what's on the right side of the frame. A lot of times in a landscape, especially when there's mountains and clouds, it's really hard to mark what this is. So I'll look for something down in the earth, like a tree or a rock or something, and I'll say, okay, I see that rock right there. So in my next photo, I got to make sure that that rock is right there. Okay, and that means that I captured the same thing, because otherwise it's easy to go too far. It's easy to pan over too far and miss something, and when you do, Photoshop is going to screw it all up. Now, as far as how much you want to overlap, I would really play it safe, and I would overlap at least 1/3 of your photo. So make sure that if there's a tree over in this side over here, make sure that that tree is like right in there, so that there's plenty of overlap for you. I'm going to go to the next shot, okay, and the next shot, the next shot, and the next shot, and then finally the last shot, and that's the end of that set. Now, when I'm shooting this, another thing is you want to kind of make sure that you're level across, okay? Try and keep your camera horizontal. So if there's don't kind of start going up, or don't start shooting down. There's a lot of things that can happen when you're shooting a panorama. If I hold this up right here, not only can, as you move across, you can start moving up, okay, when you're hand holding. Another thing that could happen is as you're moving across, you start tilting down, or you start doing this, okay? If you're knowledgeable of, airplanes and how airplanes fly, I think they refer to it as a pitch and a yaw. This can happen, and then this can happen. So those are all human error things that happen as you're moving your camera across. So just kind of try and be conscious of that. There's still going to be those things that happen. There's not a way that you can entirely eliminate that. But it's not that critical when Photoshop stitches this together. If you have a little bit of pitch or yaw, it'll figure it out. That's why a tripod is so good, because you won't get that on a tripod. It'll be just rock steady all the way across, and it'll be nice and level. Okay, but there's ways that we can adjust that in Photoshop. and Photoshop has a lot of great features that we'll see in a second. Okay, so I've got these photos here, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these photos, including this last one here. And just like when we did the HDR, we went into Photoshop. I'm going to take this now into Photoshop, and it's the same setting up here. It's Photo, Edit In, and this time we're going to merge to Panorama in Photoshop. Remember, we used Merge to HDR in Photoshop for the other shot. Merge to Panorama, And it's going to take those photos and open them up in the merge to panorama interface of Photoshop. Okay, and this is that interface in Photoshop. You're going to go into the photo merge dialog box, and you can see all the photos that you selected here. And then it's going to ask you, how do you want Photoshop to stitch it? And rather than go through all of these, I've tried several of these. The ones that I found that work probably the best are the cylindrical, which I use mostly, and the perspective. But I'm going to use cylindrical for this. And what it's an algorithm that basically Photoshop uses to stitch these photos together. Yeah, let's just leave it at that for now. We're going to blend these images together. Now, another thing that Photoshop will do is it'll try and remove the vignettes around the edges of the photo, natural vignettes caused by your particular lens that you used. Remember, every lens has, different, quirks about them and distortion things, and some lens vignette more than others, and so it will try and remove that. It will also try and remove for any distortion in your lens. Let's not check any of these, because when you do, what happens is it just takes longer for Photoshop to process this, and we can do all this in Lightroom. Content aware fill, transparent areas, meaning that if there are some transparent areas that it missed, it will fill it in with content aware fill. We're going to do this anyway, separately in Photoshop, but so let's not check this. Okay, so we've selected we have all these photos. We're going to use cylindrical. We're going to click OK. Now, again, this is where it's automatically processing all of this now. It's choosing each photo, and what it's going to do is it's going to cut a mask for each individual photo. It's going to mask it, and it's going to overlap it, and it's going to find the common, areas and stitch it together. This takes as long as how fast your computer is. So again, faster your computer, faster this happens. I'm thankfully on a fairly fast computer, an i7 Mac, and so this is doing this pretty quick. If I was on my computer, the computer in my bedroom, this would be painfully slow. Now you have to remember, these are 7 raw photos. And remember, raw photos are much higher in file size than regular JPEGs. You always want to shoot in RAW. Okay, so this is the final stitched photo in Photoshop. You can see many things. Now, one of the things that is kind of a quirk in Photoshop is that in this view, it kind of suddenly shows you these cracks. And it looks like there's cracks in these photos where it stitched it together. But actually, these cracks don't show, because if I zoom in here, you can see they disappear. See, there's no cracks there. But back in this view here, you can see these little cracks, and a lot of people look at this and go, hey, what happened? I think it's at this view. See, right about there, it just starts disappearing. There's a point there where it disappears. You can also see that the lighting conditions had changed throughout this photo. When I started here on the left side, the sun was blocked by the clouds, so it was darker. And then the sun was coming out here in this part of the shot. That's just the way that scene was. That's the natural way that scene was. But we can make this better. We can, because if you look at the actual shot that I ended up with, I mean, it's much brighter than the actual photo. So this was right out of camera, and we did quite a bit to make this work. Okay, now you can see all of the layers in Photoshop, all of the layers of each slice, each shot. And the first thing I want to do in this is merge them all together. Okay, so I'll just go straight up here, and I'll merge or flatten the image or merge visibles, or merge layers. So I'll merge layers into one layer. The reason why you have this kind of transparent area up here and the reason why it's kind of crooked is because of the human error. Again, as you move your camera across, you know, you might not have been absolutely horizontal, or you might have pitched a little bit. And so this is the area. Now we can fill this in. This is a perfect example of why you would use content-aware fill. You know, the feature in Photoshop, which is amazing. It automatically fills in what it thinks you want here. It's kind of artificial intelligence in a sense, where it's going to figure that you want clouds and sky up here and you want dirt down here. So I'm going to do that real quick. I'm going to make that selection. So I'll go up to the magic wand tool. Actually, I'll use the magic wand tool. And I'll just click in this transparent area, and you can see it's selected the marching ants go all around because it's one contiguous, you know, area here. Oh, it didn't catch this part right here, so let me zoom in here, and you'll notice that it didn't catch this part because it was blocked off here by the photo. So I'll hold the shift key down and select that much of it and add that to the selection. Okay, so I'll back out, Command 0, and then I'll just go simply up to Edit, Fill, and the fill that I want is content aware. Okay, so I want Photoshop to kind of figure that out for me. So I click OK, and again, this is a process that is based on CPU speed. So depending on how fast your computer is, this could take minutes, literally, for Photoshop to figure this out. But I've done this before, and on this computer, it's fairly quick. This is another point where your computer might crash if you're doing this. So sometimes if your computer is slow, you might not want to do this content-aware fill business. You might just want to crop it out. So it's up to, you know, your system. Okay, so you can see now if I deselect Command D, you can see, wow, Photoshop really did a good job in kind of figuring out what, you know, filling in the holes here. There is, if I zoom in here, there is this annoying kind of barbed wire and fence post right here. And I'm going to use content aware fill again to get rid of this. And I'm going to use Photoshop's AI to figure this out. I'm going to take my lasso tool, and I'm just going to do a rough selection around this here. Running out of desk space here. Make that connection. Okay, select that. Again, I'm going to do the content aware fill. Click OK. And I want Photoshop to kind of figure out what that should be if that post and that barbed wire wasn't there. Okay, so it did so. I'm going to do Command D, and you know, you can get away with this, the content aware fill feature of Photoshop. You can get away with it if you have a lot of, you know, like grass and dirt and things like that. But if these were like really specific things like building windows or something like that, it wouldn't work. Basically, it's cloning. It's cloning another section of the photo and replacing it. So if you clone some grass over here, even though it's a copy, no one's going to see that. All right, so with that, I'm going to go back, and I'm going to go to this side now and do the same thing with this barbed wire. Just kind of just get my lasso tool and do a little quick selection around here. And then back up to Edit, Fill, Content Aware, and get rid of this barbed wire. And there it is. Okay, and you can see what it did. You can see here that this part of the green is really this part over here, I think. It just cloned it. And you can go in and you can, take your stamp tool and, make this look a little bit better if you want. But as small as this is going to be, no one's going to notice. Okay, so if I back out, I've got everything. And, if there's some trash here that you wanted to, get away with, take out, you can do your stamp tool and fix all of that up. But for the most part, I have everything that I need. I took out whatever I could in Photoshop. And this is where Photoshop is a lot better than Lightroom, because you have these tools and it's just a better software program to do this kind of stuff in. Okay, now I want to get back into Lightroom so we can process this, and I'm going to do Command S, and that's all you have to do, because again, if you bring it in from Lightroom and you just save it, it will save it right back to Lightroom, and it'll also make you a copy, a TIFF image in your file where this originally came from. So I'll do Command S, and we'll go back to Lightroom. And we should see it come out here once it's done. And because I already have it here, I wonder if it's just showing me the same one, because I had already saved it once. No, I guess not. It's still saving up here. Okay, so it's done. And let's bring it into Lightroom. There it is right there. It's called Edit 3 TIFF. All right, so there it is in the Develop module. And now all I have to do is process this in Lightroom. Let me grab this. I'm going to hide Photoshop here because I don't need that, and bring up Lightroom. Kind of get this. Open this up a little bit bigger here. Okay. Now it's very similar to the HDR process that we did. I'm going to go over to my presets here, and I think I had mentioned before that I already made presets, and I usually make two sets of presets, one for landscape and one for people, scenery and people. So I'm going to use my basic landscape recovery, and you're going to see how it changes this section up here, so I don't have to do each individual one. But when I click on that, you can see that it maximize my highlights and my shadows. And then I'll just double check with these whites and black sliders. I'm going to hold the Option key down, click on this, and maybe pull the brightness up a little bit until I start seeing the first bits of light. Okay, something like that. And then I'm going to take the blacks and maybe bring that down a little bit. So you can see that that really did a lot. Okay, this is before and after, so it really brightened up the exposure. Now, one of the things that it also does when you when you really max out your highlights and shadows, is it increases the saturation of red and orange. And that seems to be across the board with Lightroom. So whenever you do that, you're always going to get this kind of oversaturated red, orange, and maybe even yellow sometimes. So before I desaturate this stuff, I'm going to up the texture a little bit in this, and I'm going to up the clarity. Now the clarity are midtones, and so what you're doing is you're kind of sharpening up the, not sharpening, but you're kind of punching up the midtones. And maybe a little bit of color vibrance. Saturation is fine. I mean, it's perfectly, in fact, it's kind of overly saturated with this blue sky here. But I'm going to take the red saturation down a little bit, and definitely the orange saturation down. Okay. Maybe even some of the yellow saturation. I want to pull that back. something like that. This is let me look at the history here, bring up the history. So before I did all that saturation, this is before, and you can see all the intense saturation here, and then this is after. So I toned that down just a bit. Maybe I toned it down a little bit more, but anyway, you could sit here and tweak these things for days. Okay. The blue looks kind of overly saturated, so I might come down to the blues and take that saturation down out of the sky a little bit. Okay, that looks maybe a little bit better. Now, one of the main problems of this photo is, to me, it looks like it's kind of going downhill. It's kind of angling. You know, this is high on this side and this is low on this side. And one of the things we talked about with HDR is to go down to your transformation and kind of check the rotation. So I'm going to rotate this up just a hair, like that. And then when we do that, you can see how it's rotating off of its canvas here. So I'm going to constrain the crop, which means that it'll crop in a little bit. And I kind of like that a little better. You know, a distinct horizon in this photo is kind of hard to see. It's kind of hard to get the feel of, so you got to kind of feel it. And I still think that that's just a little bit too angled. So I'm going to pull that up just a hair. Yeah, I like that better. Okay, let's go back now. And after we do our main basic panel here, and the basic panel, again, is your color adjustments and your exposure and, you know, tonal adjustments, color adjustments. And then we're going to go to sharpening. And remember that little formula that I was saying that I use of around 70% sharpening and about 30% noise reduction. Okay. Well, if I bring these back to 0, I have a preset right here that's called landscape sharpening. So I just click that, and you can see that that automatically goes to 70 and 30. So that's what's nice about presets, is that if you're using them a lot, you know, it's just a lot easier. I'm going to click my landscape sharpening and my chromatic aberration, which is eliminating a lot of the purple fringing in high contrast areas. A lot of times when you have edges that are very contrasty to the background, like for instance, we have this cloud area here, and sometimes you'll see some purple fringing up here. And when you take out that, it's called aberration or chromatic aberration. When you adjust for that, then it will take that away. See how nice and sharp this photo is? I mean, this, you know, that's the raw photo. That I mean, look at how zoomed in I am, and you can still see every single, you know, nook and cranny in this whole thing. Pretty amazing. Okay, so now the next thing is we have some lighting conditions that are just kind of weird. I know that the light was darker here on this side, but it just looks kind of funny. And sometimes when Photoshop stitches photos together, it will do some funny things with that lighting. Now, if I wasn't on manual focus, okay, remember in the beginning I told you to get on manual focus? If I was on autofocus, this would be terrible. I mean, I would get all kind of different tones in the sky, and you would start seeing the distinct slices that were taken. So that's where you really want to establish one lighting condition and then shoot it all the way through. But in this case, it's a little bit too dark for me on this side. So what I'm going to do is take this gradated filter tool up here. It's the top tool in your, remember, in Lightroom, you don't have too many tools, but you do have the gradated filter. And when I click on this, I get a crosshair, and I'm going to hold my shift key down and drag across. this way. Now what that's doing is, it's because my exposure was brighter. Okay, let me set that back to 0. Okay, this is the normal photo. And as I up my exposure, it's going to start brightening the light from this point to this point gradually. So as I come up, you can see how that left side starts getting brighter. Now, if this line is more over here, you can see the run is shorter. And I want the run to be pretty wide all the way across. And I can adjust. So when I hover over this, you can see in orange where the lighting effect is taking place, how it's gradating across from this line to this line. So you can move the center of this and make it happen in the middle of the photo, or maybe more towards this side of the photo. It always starts on the farmost left line. But in this case, I'm going to start it there. You can adjust the angle of this by clicking and dragging. See, when you hover over the center line, you get this curved line. And now I can turn this and angle it like this. Again, it always starts from the left line and gradates to the right line. I'm going to Command Z that back. Okay, so that brightened up this enough. Maybe I'll want it to be a little bit brighter on this side. Okay. And then I'll click my gradient tool and that goes away. So I've kind of leveled out now the exposure. A lot of times when you see a photo small, you can get a much better idea of its overall exposure. When it's really big in your screen, it's kind of hard sometimes to see. You know, a lot of times it's like you got to back away from stuff in order to see the big picture. And that's where this photo here, this little thumbnail, helps out. I kind of want the focus to be more on the mountains than here. This seems to be the brightest part of the photo, which, remember, your eye always goes to the brightest part of the photo. So I'm going to take this gradated filter tool again, and this time I'm going to drag it from the bottom up about halfway. And instead of brightening this exposure, I'm going to darken the exposure down on the ground a little bit, just a little bit like that. And that darkens up the bottom of the photo and brings your eye up to this area now. So here's before. Oops, that's the entire before. I'm sorry. Here's before, and here's after. Okay, just a little bit of darkening on the bottom. Sometimes you'll do that on the top, especially up here where it's really bright clouds. I might take this gradated filter again, kind of click and drag it down, and darken up the top a little bit. Okay, but I don't want to darken up this area and this area because it's pretty dark. So in this case, I might take this, slide it over, and kind of twist this way. Pull this up over here. And then darken. Oh, that's actually darkening up. Yeah, you have to just kind of play around with this, but I'm going to twist this a little bit here and move this down up to around here. Pull this down a little bit. And then let's see if I can darken these clouds a little bit more. Yeah, that's better. So I was able to darken just this section here without really messing with this. Might turn this up a little bit. And not messing with this either, because I don't want to darken too much down here. But I was able to kind of darken that. See, if I go really, really extreme, you can see where that effect is taking place. Bring that down a little bit more. Okay. I don't know. I get so picky with this, and then back it up a little bit. Okay, so anyway, that kind of gives you an idea of what you can do, and you'll spend hours on this, believe me. But we got to get this finished. Okay, so that's pretty much, for now, let's say what I want. Now, this area in here is a little bit too bright, but I like the tone of the rest. So I might take an adjustment brush here. This is my brush. Remember, the brush looks like a kind of a circle, and you, with the scroll wheel, you can make it bigger or smaller. And I have my feather of this brush down to a 100% feathering, which is very soft feather. And I'm going to lower the exposure a little bit on this brush, and I might just kind of go across here and darken that a bit, maybe brighten it up just a hair. But even out this exposure all the way across, because I think it's a little bit too much right there. I really like the way the light is hitting these trees over here, and that was actually happening. It was almost like sun was coming through the clouds and just highlighting this area up here. Kind of looks a little fake, but that really started happening. I might take my adjustment brush again, go to a new brush and make it smaller. Maybe increase the exposure a little bit. And, if you wanted to pop some, a little bit of highlights in these trees, I can brighten this up a little bit here and brighten it up a little bit there. Okay, do little things like that. You don't want to go too much because you don't want the eye to start really focusing on this. In every photo that you process, you always want to ask yourself, what is the main focal point? What do I want people, what is this photo about, in one word? And in one word, the photo is really about these mountains. That's the subject. So that's where we want the viewer to look. Click on the adjustment brush to deselect it now. And now I have this photo ready to go. So what I did was just go to File and Export. I have some presets set up here so I don't have to change the resolution every time and my watermark and all of that. But let's say I wanted to export this out to Facebook. Okay, Facebook is low res, pretty low res. So my preset for that is Web Landscape with Watermark. So when I click on this, you can see that it automatically changes the this is something new in Lightroom that I have to figure out, but anyway, this web landscape should get me that. I don't know why this is doing what it's doing here. It says some sections are hidden when presets are checked. I don't get it. This should work. Oh, great. I'm going to have to look into this. All right, anyway. Okay, so here we go. So I will export it out and it will look like this. Okay, it'll have my watermark in it. It will have all the adjustments of Lightroom, and it'll be ready to post on Facebook. If I wanted this to be on in print, if I wanted to actually print this out, then I wouldn't use 72 pixels per inch. Facebook is 2048 pixels by 2048. I use that. But with print, it would be 300 ppi, and this photo would be much larger than that. In fact, the maximum photo for print of this might even be around 26 inches wide. And that's another reason why you might want to use shoot a panorama, because you're going to get a much larger print at full resolution than if you just shot one photo of it and blew it up to your wall. It would lose resolution and will look terrible. So by using a panorama, it's a tremendously large file, but when you actually export it out at 300 pixels per inch, you get a lot of length at full resolution at 300 pixels per inch. So that's definitely a reason if you're printing your photos. And I really recommend that you do that, that you print your photos. Print them out and put them on your wall. There's nothing like an actual printed image hanging on a wall. Then, we see so much now of images that are just on websites and, on social media and things, but it just never the impact. Personally, I like Google Photos to show full res images, full screen. Google Images tends to show much more detail. It's sharper. I think the color is better than blowing something up in any other social media platform. There is a site called 500px, and it's a site for photographers. In fact, I'm going to go here. I think it's 500px.com. It's a site that is free to join, but you can upload high-res images to 500px. There's no limitation like social media is. And so when you blow up those photos in 500px, I mean, they are absolutely as sharp as they can be. One of the things is, and see, when I blow this up in Lightroom, when I blow it up that big, you can really see that detail. But if I'm in Google and, even Google Photos or Facebook, and I blow this up, it's not nearly as nice. Is that all I can do? I guess that's as large as it goes. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so let me stop that. Okay, so a panorama, another technique of shooting a landscape photo. Most of the time, you're going to be shooting that one shot, landscape shot from your camera. Maybe an HDR you might shoot, but it'll be that single image. And that's fine, and those are fine. But if you really want to up your game in landscape photography, shoot a panorama and take it into Photoshop, stitch it together, go take it back into Lightroom and process it, and you'll get an amazing image. One thing about panoramas, though, is that they're long and skinny. And so when you do show that on social media, you've seen that, right? The panoramas are just really skinny and they're really small, especially when you're looking at it on a phone. Another thing that I do a lot is I size my photos for devices. Like I have a Samsung, and so I want the photo, when someone looks at it, to come out to the full screen of the Samsung screen or an iPhone or whatever. So what I did was, when I am in Lightroom and I do go to export, one of the export settings that I had up here, which I didn't load in, is for mobile device. So if you know that most of the people that are going to see your, oops, I'm not sharing my screen so you can't see that, but when you are processing your photo and it's going to go up and most of the people are going to see it on a phone, then you might want to use that as a preset in Lightroom so that they can see it, and it's utilize the whole screen. Because otherwise what happens is that, it only shows up in a portion of your phone and you don't really get the full effect of that. Looking at photos on a phone is terrible anyway, but hey, most people, that's the way they see it. Okay, so that's all I have for today. Is I wanted to just show you another method of shooting a landscape photo. We're going to be done with landscapes and we're going to get into shooting people next. If we have some time, I want to spend at least, well, time's running out, man. I mean, already it's the end of the module is the 23rd, I believe, of December. So I want to talk about shooting people. I want to talk about shallow depth of field techniques, how to achieve that, so that the next thing that we're going to do is talk about getting images. And shallow depth of field is not necessarily just for just for people. You can do landscapes. You can do a lot of product photography is done with shallow depth of field. In fact, product photography is something that, let me just share the screen for 1 second, then we'll be done. Product photography is something that we would use in all kind of things, especially for graphic design. We would be shooting anything from, any type of products to food shots. This is where you really want that background back here to really get blurred out, but you want your foreground to be nice and sharp. Sometimes you want the foreground to be blurry, then the focus, then the background to be blurry. So you're talking about 3 steps, 3 stages of, focus in this. So how do you achieve that? How do you get, blurry, focused, and then blurry, in one shot? And that's a technique that you need. It has a lot to do with how zoomed in you are and how what your focal length is. A telephoto lens, zoomed in close, and how far your camera is away from the subject. So the closer you get to your subject, the closer or the more depth of field, the shallower the depth of field becomes. And, so you end up with a shot that could possibly look like this, where it's very blurry in the foreground, very focused here, but then, blurred to oblivion back here. And that is something that is a function of your lens. It's something that certain lenses do much better than other lenses, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to spend thousands of dollars on a lens to get that effect. There's shooting techniques that I'll show you how to do that. Now, they're kind of limited with the lens that you have, but it's still possible. It's very possible to get those shots. So, and then, that becomes very creative. You can do portraits of your family. You can actually do portrait shoots and charge money for it. So we'll talk about people, shooting people. And so much in photography to discuss. I mean, I could teach this till the end of time. I would say we would probably need a good 2 or 3 classes of photography to have a decent grip on it. But people and landscapes, I think, are, if you know how to at least get the feel for shooting that, then I think you'll be okay. Does anybody have any questions about anything that they shot, or I didn't get a chance to look at the discussion or those yet, but was there anything that you were having trouble with your cameras that I can answer, or?
I wasn't having trouble with the camera itself, I don't think.
Uh-huh.
But I was wondering if you had any recommendations for maybe YouTube pages or places I can, watch videos to get a better grasp of photography.
Yeah, I do. I'll post some sites. When you say it's kind of really an open-ended question because photography encompasses so many things. That's one of the things that I have trouble with in this class is like, what type of photography? It's such a general word. It's like, you want to shoot landscapes better, you want to shoot people better, you want to learn lighting, you want to, you know, specifically, I think at the very start is understanding your camera and its features and what those buttons do. But at the same time, there's no sense in learning what a button does if you don't know the concept behind when you should use it. When do I
Yeah.
use this? Uh, so photography is very specific in terms of what it is you're shooting. A better way for me to answer that would be what is it that you want to shoot, or what is it that you like to shoot? And then I could say, okay, watch this, or buy this camera, or
Okay.
buy this lens, or, like that. One of the most common questions that students have asked me is, what camera should I buy? I want to buy a camera, so what should I get? And if you went to a camera store and you asked that question, a salesperson behind the counter, the first thing that they would ask you is, what do you want to shoot? What is it that you want to shoot? Now, a lot of people can't answer that question. The typical question answer to that is, I don't know, everything, right? It's like, I like everything. I like shooting this and I like shooting that. And that's why these cameras are designed the way they are, because they do those things well. And the two things I would say that most people shoot are scenery and people, right? You take a camera to your parties, you take a vacation and you want to shoot this scene. Uh, those are the two things that most people shoot. I mean, rarely do people say, well, I want to shoot food. you know, if you want to shoot food, then yeah, there's special lenses that do that very, very well. But, you know, I think, but I will give you some resources. Okay. I'll definitely give you some resources and links that you can follow uh, to give you a basic understanding of how to do it, what lenses to use, what cameras to shoot it with, and so forth.
Thank you.
Okay, that's about as best as I can.
I
Uh,
understand. I understand.
yeah, yeah. It's. I had one guy in a graphic design class look at me and he said, well, how do you print stuff? Okay, right? Hey, Chris, you're laughing, right? I mean, it's a question that you just don't have a one sentence answer for. Obviously, how do you print stuff? I mean, that's kind
Control
of
P.
what's that?
Control P.
Yeah, there
Or
you go.
Command P.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. I can't explain the entire offset litho process to you in one sentence. Um, but yeah, I know where you're coming from, Ruben, and uh, I think it's a matter. Photography is a journey that you take, and through it, you kind of start learning what you like to shoot and the style that you like to shoot it in. And I think a lot of that has to do with looking at other photographers and, looking at photos and saying, wow, I really like that. How did they do that?
Hmm.
You know, if you ask me that question, I can give you a much more specific answer on how to do that, how to shoot that particular thing. But photography in general, it's kind of so big of a topic. But I'll see what I can. Those Adorama photos, I mean videos. That one, Mark Wallace.
Yeah.
That's a great resource. In fact, that's one I would give you. Is look at the Adorama network or channel on YouTube. Mark Wallace, and he's got playlists of every kind of subject and topic that but there's many others that I'll
Gotcha.
give you. So. Okay. All right. So sorry to take up more than the hour's time, but that's it. I'll have a discussion and small assignment for you guys to do. What the assignment is going to be is to shoot a panorama. Okay. That's what I'm going to ask for you to do by Sunday and process it. So a panorama. Uh, in the technique that we talked about today. Okay, so give it a shot. Go outside and one other thing before you do that, though, is make sure that whatever you're shooting in a panorama is far away. Okay, so go out to a park and shoot something that's far away rather than something that's close. Don't be in a room, in your room or in your backyard that, you know, it's not big enough. It's not far enough away. Okay, I shot mountains. I go to the beach or I shoot that. I'm not saying that you have to do that, but you know, even pointing your camera across the street and shooting the houses across your street, it's still too close. Okay, and what's going to happen is you're going to get tremendous distortion. You know how when you do the panorama thing in your camera with your phone, right? You ever do that? I'm sure you have, right? Where you shot panorama and you swing your camera around your phone. What happens, right? You get this big bend in the photo. Okay, and the reason why you're getting that bend is because that's distortion. Your camera, the lens cannot process that close of a subject in that wide of a panorama. So you have to shoot far away. That's one of the things that, you know, I forgot to mention. Okay, so see if you can get out there, you know, when you're in your car, just get out of your car. I know we're not supposed to be outside now, but just, you know, do a quick pano, set up your camera and then shoot it. All right. Okay. See you guys. Take care.